Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, the Tim Connelly rumors continue as Glen Taylor, the Timberwolves' current majority owner, gears up to meet with the current president of basketball operations with the Nuggets. Will Tim Connelly get the job in Minnesota? What will they have to give him to take the job? And what does it mean moving forward? What's his track record in Denver like? We're talking all about it today on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully you had a fantastic weekend. Today on the show, we're talking a lot about Tim Connelly, the current Nuggets president of basketball operations, who might have or does have apparently a legitimate shot at getting that job in Minnesota. We'll talk all about that here in a minute. First, though, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Locked On Wolves is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, Odyssey. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T Wolves and at Beecken with two B's, two E's, CKEN. All right, so we spent some time talking about this last week. I guess it would have been Thursday's show. A lot of this news broke last Wednesday that the Timberwolves had kind of a top five executives they were most interested in, and then the name Tim Connelly was out there as someone the Wolves have been interested in, but it got more serious. Dane Moore of the Dane Moore NBA podcast, Darren Wolfson, Doogie in the Twin Cities were a couple of the reporters who were on it. John Krasinski and Shams Charania of The Athletic also talked about it. Middle of last week, we spent Thursday's show talking a little bit about Tim Connelly, but over the weekend, a little bit more broke. And I want to kind of talk through what happened and then what my thoughts on it are. And then later this week, I'm hoping to have at least one, if not multiple people from the Denver market, from various blogs, podcasts in Denver on the show to talk about Tim Connelly and what he's done in Denver, what he's meant to that organization, et cetera. But I'll give you my take here today. First, what happened this weekend, it was reported, I believe this was Friday, from Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN, that Tim Connelly had moved through the portion of the process where he was talking to Alex Rodriguez and Mark Laurie, of course, the minority owners of the Timberwolves, who are on track to become majority owners by the end of next year, December of 2023. But they're the ones kind of heading up this process and wanting a big name, proven executive, a leader with a proven track record as being a successful front office executive in the NBA to lead the front office moving forward. And according to Wojnarowski, the Timberwolves were pretty far down this path already. And then he reported, Wojnarowski as well as Chris Hine of the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, both reported that Tim Connelly was going to meet with Glen Taylor, of course, still the majority owner of the Timberwolves for the time being. And he's going to, currently Laurie and Rodriguez own a fraction of the team, not a fraction. They own a minority of the team. That will increase by 20%. Pretty soon, there'll be 40% owners of the Wolves. And then eventually the plan would be for them to take majority control by the end of 2023. It could happen a little sooner. It could happen a little later. Of course, somewhat ironically, we'll get into that later. So that's the latest report, is that this has moved on to that step in the process. Mark Stein, of course, formerly of ESPN and I believe the New York Times, now has his own Substack page and independently reports on the NBA. He talks about how he wrote an article about this on his Substack, that the Timberwolves are, kind of the same stuff, they're after Connelly, but he also mentions that there's that Denver is, or that there are folks around the league who are not sure that Connelly will simply just leave Denver for Minnesota. Well, that's obvious. Why would you, when you have Nikola Jokic, the back-to-back MVP award winner, why would you just leave a team that was very successful despite being ravaged by injuries, had the MVP again? You've built this team. He's been there. He's been in charge since summer of 2013. So nearly 9 years. They've won 40 or more games in the last, 6 seasons, I believe. And well, actually, let me just get that exactly. Yeah, the last 6 seasons, they won 40 or more games. And they've been in the playoffs the last 4. They went to the conference finals just a couple of years ago. So Why would he leave? Well, obviously the Timberwolves are going to have to make him essentially a Godfather offer, and there's a lot floating around out there about what that could actually be. I believe Darren Wolfson said the scuttlebutt is it could be an 8-year contract worth what he put on Twitter was a lot more money than what he's getting paid currently in Denver. There also, I mentioned this on Thursday's show, that an ownership stake would have to be involved for Connelly to really seriously consider coming to Minnesota. So you're talking a long-term deal. I don't know how many years are left on his deal in Denver. I'm not sure that's public knowledge, but a lot more money. So I don't know how much more they're going to pay him, plus an ownership stake. So a raise, security, ownership stake, and the ability to pick and choose your front office. I mean, Sachin Gupta has a year left on his deal, so he very likely would stay on. That would likely be expected. Also, the other thing that's really interesting here, the Chris Finch dynamic is super interesting. But Connelly worked with Chris Finch in Denver when Finch was running the offense there for I guess it was really just a season that he was in Denver, but there would be familiarity there. And each of them seem to have personalities that are rather inclusive, and they're very likely to get along with one another, Connelly and Finch. And I think we talk more about that later, but that's another layer to consider. Is there some familiarity there? They would give Connelly the complete control over everything, except for maybe, hey, Gupta is going to be here. We'd like you to keep Finch, but he's probably comfortable with that. Do whatever else you want in the near term. Um, that would be really attractive to somebody who's been in the same spot for nearly a decade. And even though it would be likely the same title, maybe a little bit fancier, but I mean, he runs everything in Denver currently. There could be some intrigue there. And also to come to a team that, Denver, outside of that like 5-year span right after George Karl left the Nuggets, where they didn't make the playoffs for 5 years, they've been perennially a very good team. You go back to the 03-04 season, the Nuggets have only missed the playoffs 5 times in the last 19 years. The Timberwolves, or 18 years, I guess, the Timberwolves have made the playoffs twice in that same span. The Nuggets have missed the playoffs 5 times. So the Nuggets, even though they're obviously not a major market team. They haven't been to the finals in that span. They've been to the conference finals twice. They've made the playoffs in, what did I say, 14 of the last 19 years. And each of the last 4 years, they've won 40 or more games in each of the last 6 years. So you're leaving an organization that's had success and has the reigning MVP, 2-time MVP. But what is your next step? How do you keep building around Jokic? That could be a little bit more challenging, even if he's about to get an extension. Then maybe you've got Edwards, who's still just 2 years into the league. You're about to give Towns likely a supermax. So you have 2 guys now that are locked up you can build around. And you have Ant for, if you include all the various extensions, you could have a guy who has, obviously the ceiling is we don't know what the ceiling is for Ant, right? It's infinite at this point. Could have him for nearly the next decade, right? So there's a lot that's attractive there as well. He's familiar with a similar type market in terms of market size, and obviously the division is familiar. So there's a lot of other factors there, I think, that are really fascinating. What I want to do next is talk briefly about his track record in Denver at a really high level. I don't want to get too in the weeds yet. We certainly will do that as this becomes hopefully real in the next few days. And also when I have discussions with various folks from Denver that cover the Nuggets. But I want to do a little bit of a high level at what he's been up to over the past several years. And then also there's a reporter from Denver who had a couple of interesting tweets about just how important Tim Connelly is to that organization and how difficult it would be to see him go. I think that's a really fascinating angle to look at. First, let's talk about our friends over at Sakara Nutrition. Feeling your best starts with what you eat. Sakara helps you live a healthy, balanced lifestyle, and it helps you truly enjoy it with delicious, plant-rich, transformational nutrition that builds a foundation for living in your best body. Sakara is a wellness company anchored in food as medicine on a mission to nourish your body through the power of plants. Sakara gives you the tools you need to transform your life with their organic, ready-to-eat meal delivery program and functional wellness essentials. They're nutritionally designed. Chef-crafted breakfasts, lunches, and dinners are made with powerful plant-rich ingredients, helping boost your energy, support your digestion, curb your sugar cravings, and get your skin glowing. Plus, it's all delivered right to your door, ready to eat. Sakara's functional, plant-rich wellness essentials help you create a body you love living in, from their best-selling Metabolism Super Powder to the foundation of their daily supplement packs. Sakara's products are designed to support your wellness goals anytime, anywhere. And right now, Sakara is offering our listeners 20% off their first order when they go to sakara.com/lockdown20 or enter code lockdown20 at checkout. That's Sakara, SAKARA.com/lockdown20 to get 20% off your first order. That's sakara.com/lockdown20. Thanks again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Now make sure to go check out the Locked On NBA Big Board Show with host Rafael Barlow from NBA Draft Junkies. And he's the author of the NBA Big Board newsletter. He's joined by Richard Stamen, Sam Ferris, and Leif Thulin, giving fans an in-depth look into the NBA draft, mock draft, player rankings, and of course, big boards. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Be sure to check it out. The Wolves, of course, have 4 picks in this draft, including number 19. We're going to talk a lot of draft even later this week. The Tim Connelly thing is really the story that is kind of keeping me from getting full into draft mode. But we're going to also have some guests on related to the draft as we get deeper into the week. But go check out the Locked On NBA Locked On NBA Big Board podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. Okay. So a couple more notes on the Connolly thing. Mike Singer, who covers the Denver Nuggets for the Denver Post, had a bit of a tweet thread on, this was late last week. I think it was actually late Thursday, maybe even, that I thought was really interesting. He said, if Tim, meaning Tim Connelly, were to leave, I don't think people realize the impact he's made on the locker room / culture in Denver. He's empowered coaches, staff members, and players, while his number one priority is enjoying the people he works with. There are people who've taken less money to stay here. Then he goes on to say, as for relationships with the players, he's fostered more trust than you can imagine with Nikola, Jokic, and Jamal Murray, and even less heralded guys on the team like Boogie, of course, Cousins. In many ways, he's set the tone for the organization. Have talked with a lot of people around the Nuggets, and there's a lot of angst over the Tim Connelly situation. You won't find a person in the organization that wants to see him go. My read, do the Crunkies want to reward Connelly's success, or are they cool letting him walk? All right, that's the end of his tweet thread. Crunkies, of course, being the ownership group, Stan Kroenke and his entertainment group. I think this is really interesting. I think that the term angst is really interesting. If you go and look at some of the other places, so including Mark Stein and his reporting, there's a lot of people that are like, would he really leave? You know, that sort of a thing. The Nuggets they seem to not be. There was some reporting out there. I apologize. I forget who it was now that was saying basically the Nuggets have kind of known this is coming. They know the Wolves have been interested. They gave permission for Minnesota to talk to Connelly, gave permission for Connelly to talk to them. Is it that big of a deal? Well, clearly it would be, to even if the ownership group themselves doesn't quite understand, the Nuggets ownership group, everybody from Connelly on down would be severely impacted by him leaving. By all accounts, all the players, all the coaches, all the front office staff really like him. And the fact that he's already, that like Boogie Cousins is mentioned, a guy who's hasn't been there that long and is, frankly, the name is a lot bigger than what he does on the court. And, he's not a major piece of the Nuggets core, that he's developed these relationships with players and has this reputation with all these players, and everybody seems to really like him. That matters a great deal. And it also is 100% in line with Mark Lowry's philosophy. Remember the people first philosophy. He's got the mantra, everything he's done in all of his companies that he's acquired, that he's improved, the companies he's started. Mark Lowry has the same MO everywhere he goes, and the same principles that guide what he does. And clearly, based on everything we've seen or that we can read and that we've heard, Tim Connelly kind of embodies those qualities and could be a perfect fit for Lowry's philosophy in Minnesota. And that's to say nothing about the actual results that we've seen in Denver. So quickly, I mentioned earlier, he was hired in the summer of 2013. So that roster was mostly set. It was like right around the time of the draft that year. I believe Brian Shaw had already been hired to be the coach. He fired Brian Shaw midway through the next season. They were still competitive, right? They went 36-46 his first year, the next year 30-52. And then since then, they increased their win total every season until they reached the conference finals in the COVID-19 shortened 1920 season. So the Nuggets went on to win 33 games. Then they won 40 games the next year in Mike Malone's second year there. So he hires Mike Malone, which matters. By the way, his first draft in charge, Nikola Jokic, is selected in the second round. And Tim Connelly's first draft in 2014, he's the 41st pick in the draft. It was also the same draft in which he drafted Doug McDermott, but traded him in a bigger deal, which actually the Nuggets clearly won. They came out on top of this trade. So McDermott was drafted 11th on draft night. And Connelly in Denver trades him with Anthony Randolph, former Timberwolf, to the Bulls for Gary Harris, Yusuf Nurkic, and a second rounder. Now, Gary Harris was obviously an important piece for them as they improved and got better as a team. Nurkic was good for them until they ended up trading him in a significant deal to Portland. And both are good NBA players. And McDermott is also a good NBA player. I would say clearly the Nuggets came out on top on his first ever trade. They drafted Jokic in the second round. The following year, Emmanuel Mudiay was a bit of a miss in the first round in 2015, but the team continued to improve. And the 2016 draft, when he picked Jamal Murray 7th, remember that was the year that the Timberwolves picked Chris Dunn, I believe it was 4th that season. Juancho Hernan-Gomez 15th, a solid NBA regular, maybe drafted grand scheme, maybe he was picked a little earlier than he should have been compared to some other guys in that draft. Malik Beasley 19th. So he made 3 first-round picks. All of them are NBA rotation guys, Murray, Hernan-Gomez, and Beasley. And later in that same draft, he traded for Jared Vanderbilt, who was a second-round pick selected by, I forget who actually drafted him, but he was traded to Denver on draft night. The following season, 2017, he trades Donovan Mitchell on draft night. Depending on your view of Mitchell, it probably was a miss, right? But then again, you've got Jamal Murray, you've got Jokic. How would he have fit that roster in hindsight? But he also picked Monty Morris in the second round, who's on a big contract now as kind of their, was a key backup point guard for them when he was still on that second round deal. So a very important, a very impressive draft pick there. Michael Porter Jr. took a risk on him in 2018. Of course, he had injuries last year, but looks to be a star. And then Zeke Naji, the Minnesota native, I should say, in 2020, and Bones Highland, both late first round picks. So the draft track record, besides the Mitchell trade and the Mudiay pick, I guess, going back to 2015, is phenomenal. When you go through that list, and there's really only a couple of key misses, you're talking 8-9 years of history. That's pretty significant. I'm not going to go through every trade he's ever made, every free agent acquisition. But if you look at the team itself, improving from 30 to 33 to 40 to 46 wins to 54 wins in 18-19, they're expected to take that next leap the following year. The season ended up being shortened because of COVID. They went 46-27, and they did go to the conference finals when Jamal Murray went off in the NBA bubble, and they were just fantastic. Last season, the shortened season on the front end because of COVID, they go 47-25 and lose in the second round of the playoffs. This year, tons of injuries, of course, to Porter Jr. Obviously, Jamal Murray missing the entire season. Porter Jr. getting hurt early. They won just 48 games and lost in the first round in 5 games, which was a pretty disappointing result. However, this sort of consistency is the sort of consistency that Timberwolves fans would kill for, right? I mean, we have not seen this throughout the history of the Minnesota Timberwolves. It's the exact opposite of what we've seen, as I said earlier, making the playoffs 14 of the last 19 seasons. The Wolves have made the playoffs twice in the last 19 seasons. So the team building in a medium-sized market like Minneapolis, in a market that can be conceived to be less sexy and, cold and whatever else, it's not, in the middle of the country, the Northwest Division. He's found success and built around a couple of draft picks in Jokic and Murray, and found diamonds in the rough like a Monty Morris, or, drafted and then traded guys like a Beasley and a Hernan-Gomez and Jared Vanderbilt and others. Very impressive track record from Tim Connelly in Denver. And as I mentioned earlier with the Mike Singer, the Denver Post tweets, well thought of in Denver too. There's really, it seems like, no real downside to this potential move. And it's unusual, that, to say the least, that this is such a positive feeling around this here as we look ahead. So going to be on top of this story here the next couple of days. Again, hoping to get a couple of guests on this week to discuss this. So stay tuned, as if anything breaks, of course, we'll be on top of it here at Locked On Wolves. I want to close today's show with just a little bit of draft conversation. A small draft rumor involving the Wolves, mock drafts, of course, coming out left and right now that we're almost a week after the draft lottery, and visits and such going on for possible second round picks as well. So let's talk about that here next as we wrap up the show on this Monday. First, though, let's talk about our friends over at BetOnline. Our partners at betonline.net continue to be the number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, MLB scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sport wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Of course, all the NBA playoff lines, they're all kind of hovering. The home team seems to always be favored by a couple of possessions, right around 6 points, which will be interesting to track, especially now with the Heat having a 2-1 lead, despite Jimmy Butler not playing in Game 3. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let's close the show today by talking briefly about the NBA draft. Of course, the Timberwolves have the number 19 selection in the draft. They also have 3 second-round picks. I'm going to pull up the exact selections here. They have 3 second-round picks. Well, they're all between the 40 and 50 range, I guess, in the second round. So pretty decent group of selections. I mentioned the other day on the show, I think it might have been Friday, that in terms of draft power rankings, like at tankathon.com, they do a draft power rankings based on which picks each team has. The Wolves are actually 14th in the draft power rankings because they have 4 picks all in the top 50 and including that first rounder at 19. An interesting draft rumor over at Hoops Hype. This is Michael Scotto, who does a really good job covering the draft. He listed some teams that are potential traders. He says executives believe, or it says other executives are monitoring Portland as a team, Sacramento as a team that could both trade, move around in the draft, Oklahoma City, Charlotte, San Antonio. Of course, the Thunder have tons of picks, and also the Minnesota Timberwolves as potential traders. The Thunder have 4 picks in the top 34. The Hornets have 2 first rounders. Memphis has a couple of late first rounders in the 20s. The Spurs have 3 first rounders and a second. The Timberwolves have just the 19th, but they also have 3 picks in the 40 to 50 range. So you look at the OKCs, the San Antonios, the Charlottes, the Grizzlies, teams that do have multiple picks in the first round. It's easier to package a couple of first rounders to move up for a better first rounder than it would be to, with a collection of seconds. But maybe it is 2 seconds in that number 19 to get up into the lottery for whatever reason. We'll talk later about potential targets in the lottery if the Wolves were to do that. They do have all their future picks. If there's somebody they fall in love with as a prospect, they could package a future first rounder with this year's 19 to move up. This doesn't feel like the sort of draft where that's going to be something they want to do, but it's possible. I think it's more likely, as I said the other day, the Wolves make their pick at 19, if assuming they're not able to move up. They make one pick from 40 to 50, and perhaps they package a pick to get a future pick, or maybe they sell one of them. But nobody, they're not going to have 4 rookies on this team next year on top of a couple of 2-way deals they've still got to, they'll have to fill. So don't be shocked if the Wolves trade 1 or 2 of those second rounders. But I sitting here right now, about a month out from the draft, I would definitely be surprised if they were able to package a second rounder or 2 and the 19 to move up in this year's draft. Tons of mock drafts out there. There's lots of guys that the Wolves, if we're looking at what the Wolves are trying to get in this draft, clearly rebounding is a big thing, whether that comes in the form of legit size or somebody that just simply rebounds their position really well, right? If you could create what the Wolves need right now in a lab, would be a wing with size that could rebound and be versatile defensively, knock down an open 3. Again, doesn't have to be a high usage guy. They're not looking for a superstar. You've got a couple of those, right? You've got Karl-Anthony Towns, you've got Anthony Edwards, you've at least got one more year of D'Angelo Russell. Jaden McDaniels has great upside. Malik Beasley can score off the bench if he doesn't get traded. So what are you looking for? You're looking for basically like a 3-and-D type guy, but somebody who can rebound their position exceptionally well. They don't, it would be nice to have another lockdown defender. You've got to fill the roster spot of a Josh Okogie, the guys that are unrestricted free agents, Okogie, Taurean Prince, Jake Layman. Like there's going to be roster spots available. And what you want to find is somebody with size that can defend, that can rebound, that can knock down an open 3. You're not ever looking for a start number 19 anyway. But you could find somebody with upside like a Jaden McDaniels, who's found in the 20s, or Leandro Bolmaro, same thing. But I think if you find something akin to the Josh Okogie pick several years ago, Tom Thibodeau's selection when he was in charge of the Timberwolves at 20 or 21, or whenever Okogie was picked, right around that range, who had that NBA skill of being a one-on-one defender. You're looking for somebody, unless you think you find a diamond in a rough like a McDaniels, who probably still has star caliber ceiling in my mind. You're looking for somebody who has at least one elite NBA skill. And in Okogie's case, that was lockdown defense. You'd love to find somebody who could lock down defensively, hold their own on the glass, and knock down a 3. As much of that as possible. Is that possible? Well, it's tough to say, because that's whoever it is. That's why they're falling to 19, right? Because they aren't necessarily the full package. But that's what the Wolves would be looking for in this draft. That's what they would look for in the second round. And I think, again, this is a draft with decent depth. Again, it's probably not a draft where the Wolves are going to pay too much to get up into the lottery to pick somebody, because they've got a pretty set in stone rotation at this point, with really only Taurean Prince's role in question in terms of guys not under contract. So I think they probably stand pat, make their pick at 19. Again, we'll talk about specific guys starting later this week. And we'll, of course, participate in the Lockdown NBA mock drafts as well here upcoming in the next few weeks, as well as there's going to be tons of draft coverage across Lockdown NBA, across the channel. All right, that's all we have for you today. Of course, we'll stay on top of this this Tim Connelly story. If anything breaks, we'll have some quick reaction here at Lockdown Wolves, and we'll have some guests on later in the week to talk about the story as well. So be sure to stay tuned. Thanks again for making Lockdown Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, the show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, Odyssey, wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Thanks again for listening. Of course, Locked On Wolves is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. And a reminder that for your second listen, you can listen to Locked On NBA. From the first jump ball, the play-in, to the last possession of the NBA Finals, Locked On experts take you deep inside the playoffs with insight and analysis affecting all 30 teams. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.